That untouched buffet tray you walked past last night, the one that still looked perfect? Yeah, it's not going back in the kitchen. It's going somewhere else. And no, crew can't just take it home. They can't even eat it. Because a cruise ship isn't a hotel with a grocery store across the street. It's a floating city feeding a small town every single day. And one wrong move can turn dinner into a ship-wide problem. So in the next 8 minutes, I'll show you 3 things. The buffet one-way rule, the machines below deck that literally eat leftovers, and the data system that predicts what you'll reach for next. By the end, you'll never look at a cruise buffet the same way again. A cruise ship isn't just a vacation. It's a floating city in the middle of the ocean, one that never sleeps and never stops eating. Every day, thousands of passengers wake up expecting the same thing. Hot breakfast, full buffet lines, and sure, I'll grab a second plate. Then lunch hits, then dinner, then the late-night pizza that somehow tastes better at 1 a.m., and on the megaships, the scale is ridiculous. When you count guests and crew, those kitchens can push tens of thousands of meals a day, sometimes creeping up toward that small town level. Like, imagine feeding an entire small town every single day while you're floating in the ocean, and none of it is casual. Below deck, it's basically a food factory on a timer. Ingredients show up in insane quantities: mountains of eggs, cases of produce, seafood, endless bread racks. There are giant freezers tucked under your feet, and yes, there's a literal schedule for when the bacon comes up from the freezer, because the chefs plan like their lives depend on it, and in a way, they do. If one station runs out, people notice. Lines get ugly. Complaints start flying. The whole operation gets thrown off. That's why they cook extra. Not because they're sloppy, because running out of food on a ship is basically unacceptable. Which means waste isn't an accident. It's baked into the system. No matter how experienced the crew is, a floating city this size will always produce leftovers, because feeding thousands at sea leaves zero room for error. And here's the part most passengers never think about. When the buffet closes, there's a rule that decides whether food stays food or becomes waste. Back then, cruise ship kitchens ran mostly on experience and instinct. The rule was basically, cook extra, because an empty buffet station is instant trouble. The second a tray runs out, people notice, lines get tense, and complaints start bubbling up. But that better too much than not enough approach creates a huge amount of waste. And the cruise lines knew they couldn't keep running megaships on educated guesses forever. So now the buffet has a brain. Some cruise lines use AI systems like Orbisk to track buffet food tray by tray. Trays can be weighed going out and weighed coming back. And in some setups, camera-based AI can recognize what the food is and how much is getting tossed. Under the buffet, there may even be a live dashboard showing what's disappearing fast and what's just sitting there untouched. And this isn't a small tweak. On megaships like Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas, this kind of tracking has been credited with cutting food waste in the 40% range, with reported cases around 44%, without the buffet ever looking smaller to passengers. Because the software doesn't just count leftovers, it learns patterns. Sea days hit different than port days. Hot weather makes people go lighter. Rough seas changes what sounds appetizing. Even the crowd mix matters. If it's an American heavy sailing, the system knows the burger station is about to take a beating. So at a certain point, it stops being chef intuition and turns into chef versus the spreadsheet because the system starts calling the numbers. On a cruise ship, the buffet has a one-way door. The second a tray gets placed on the line, it's treated like it's already been served. Even if it looks untouched. Even if it's still hot. Even if it's sitting there under the lights like the world's most innocent lasagna, that tray has crossed the line, and it's not going back. Not because the food suddenly goes bad the moment it leaves the kitchen. It's because the buffet is the moment the kitchen loses control. The food is now sitting in the middle of a moving crowd, and the ship can't protect it the way it can behind closed doors. Think about what really happens at a buffet. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people touch the same tongs. People lean in close to read labels, talk over the food, breathe over the food. Someone coughs without thinking. A kid's sleeve brushes the edge. Somebody takes a scoop, changes their mind, and does that little put it back move like nobody saw. Most of it isn't malicious, it's just human autopilot. But the problem is simple. Once it's out there, you can't prove it stayed clean, even when it looks perfectly fine. And the stakes at sea are way higher than on land. On land, a small slip-up might mean a few people with upset stomachs and a bad review. But in the middle of the ocean, one food poisoning incident can spread fast and hit hundreds at once. The rules are strict for a reason. Once something has been on the buffet line, it doesn't go back to the kitchen to be reused, repurposed, or served again later, no matter how good it looks. And that's where the waste really starts. Not with the half-eaten plate someone leaves on a table. It starts with a tray that still looks brand new, but crossed the buffet line and now has to go. In a cruise ship galley, there's one line that matters more than flavor. It's not about whether the food still tastes amazing, it's about whether it stayed inside the kitchen's controlled zone. If something is cooked and it never leaves that zone, it still has value. A pan of salmon that's finished but hasn't gone out yet can be turned into a soup base, blended into a sauce, folded into another dish, done safely, by procedure, with the kitchen still in full control. But the second a tray touches the buffet line, the rules flip instantly. Even if it comes back looking untouched, it can't be saved. No reheating it, no holding it for later. The crew can't eat those buffet return trays either. Under the food safety standards ships follow, think FDA-style rules and CDC-level sanitation expectations, once food has been displayed for self-service, it doesn't re-enter the food pipeline. Zero exceptions, because you can't prove what happened out there. And once it crosses, three things happen. It gets logged, it gets processed, and it can't come back. Ever. So from that moment on, it stops being treated like food and starts being treated like waste that has to be handled. And on megaships, that waste isn't a cute little trash bag. It can be measured in tons. Picture a stainless steel chute below deck, like a giant mouth, feeding pulpers and dehydrators that chew through mountains of leftovers, fast, because the ship is basically managing the daily food waste of a small town. Here's the darkly funny part. You could have a tray of lobster that still looks perfect, and one single oops moment on the buffet line means it's headed straight into the machine. It feels wasteful. It is wasteful. But the industry accepts that loss because the alternative is worse. And now that you know there's a hard point of no return, the next question is the one nobody asks out loud. Once the ship grinds it down and processes it, where does it actually go? And on some ships, can they turn any of it into something useful, like energy? Once that buffet tray crosses the line, it doesn't just get tossed in a sad little trash can and forgotten. On a lot of ships, it drops into a whole waste handling system that's built to do three things fast. Shrink it, dry it out, and keep the ship from smelling like yesterday's garlic bread. Here's what that looks like behind the scenes. A lot of food waste goes down a stainless steel chute and gets ground up first. Then it gets pushed through dewatering equipment that squeezes out moisture. Because the weird secret of heavy food waste is that most of the weight is water. Pull the water out, and what's left is this much smaller, drier pulp that's way easier to store and manage without turning the lower decks into a stink festival. On newer ships, that's not always the end of the story. Some systems keep processing that pulp even further, trying to turn trash into something less useless, sometimes as a step toward energy recovery or other byproducts. Not every ship has that kind of tech, but the direction is clear. The newer the ship, the more it tries to treat waste like something you can manage smartly instead of just get rid of. Now, here's the part most passengers don't realize, especially on older ships, and even on some newer ones. In many parts of the world, MARPOL rules do allow certain food waste to be discharged at sea, but only under specific conditions. If it's been ground up small enough, it can be released once the ship is far enough from shore, often at least 3 nautical miles for comminuted food waste. If it's not ground up, the distance is usually farther, often 12 nautical miles. It's legal, it's common, and it helps ships reduce what they have to store on board. And that's why those viral TikTok clips showing cruise ships dumping sludge through giant pipes are so misleading. Many of them are outright AI fakes. In real life, legal discharges are much more subtle, quiet, low profile, and honestly kind of hard to film in the first place. So yes, some of it can be discharged legally under strict conditions. And that single word legal is what makes people stop asking questions. Because legal sounds comforting, right up until you look at what it can still do in busy ports and fragile coastlines. Cruise lines love to say they're compliant, that they follow MARPOL, follow the rules, check the boxes. Fine, but legal doesn't mean harmless. It means the ship met the minimum conditions, nothing more. And that word legal is exactly what makes people relax. Most folks hear legal discharge and think, okay, so it's fine. Like, legality is a safety guarantee. But even when it's within the rules, it's still adding organic load to the ocean. In open water, that can spread out fast. Along busy routes and sensitive coastlines, the real question is what happens over time. Ship after ship, week after week, what's the total load hitting the same region across a season? One Baltic Sea analysis estimated shipboard food waste alone could carry about 182 tons of nitrogen and 34 tons of phosphorus a year, exactly the kind of nutrient load that can fuel blooms and strip oxygen in already stressed coastal waters. Now, the part that makes people angry, the industry has been caught breaking the rules before. Big names, major fines, illegal discharges, falsified logs. And when the consequence is basically writing a check, it can start to feel like there's an unwritten rule. If you're big enough, the punishment becomes a line item. Most of what you hear about is what got caught and made public. That doesn't automatically mean everything else is clean, it just means it wasn't proven in a headline. And if you talk to people who live around busy cruise ports, this isn't some theoretical argument. They watch ship after ship come in. They see the water change near the harbor. They smell it sometimes. They just don't get access to the logs or the testing data to prove what's happening. So yeah, compliant is not the same sentence as no impact. It's the ship saying, we're inside the rulebook. And the rulebook was never designed to mean zero harm, which is exactly why the next part matters. The people below deck whose job is to track, document, and handle this stuff, because they're the difference between we're compliant as a slogan and we're compliant as reality. While you're upstairs eating dinner with the ocean in front of you, there's another world running underneath your feet. And it's not the chefs or the servers. It's the sanitation and environmental crew. The people who deal with everything you'd rather not picture. Because on a ship, trash doesn't pause. Plates keep coming, bins keep filling, and if that system slows down, the whole ship feels it fast. So down below, they're working non-stop in a space that looks nothing like vacation, more like a factory in stainless steel. This is where the leftovers and packaging get sorted, processed, and moved through the ship's waste system the right way. A lot of it gets tracked too, because waste isn't just gross, it's expensive. The more you generate, the more it costs to handle and offload. And if things aren't done correctly, the consequences aren't a messy room, it's fines and violations. That's why I call them the ship's quiet nervous system. You don't see them, but they're the reason the ship stays clean, doesn't smell weird, and keeps running smoothly. Behind one endless buffet tray, there isn't just a kitchen. There's a whole operation powered by an invisible crew keeping a floating city from falling apart. And after all that tech, all that tracking, all that below-deck muscle, the ship still generates an absurd amount of trash, because the trash room doesn't care about your marketing slogan. It only cares about volume. Even if you're conservative, Call it roughly 1 to 1.6 kilograms of solid waste per person per day. Multiply that by a ship with 5,000 people on board. The math gets ugly fast. One day becomes a pile. A week becomes a problem you can't good intentions your way out of. And remember, that number isn't even just food. It's cups, wrappers, bottles, cartons, everything that comes with feeding and entertaining a small town nonstop. That's why zero is almost never the real story. Here's the part people don't love hearing, but it's real. Cutting buffet waste isn't only on the cruise line. It's also on the people walking that line every day. Because buffets mess with your brain. When everything's unlimited, your instincts go, grab more, try everything, make it worth it. And suddenly your plate looks like it's auditioning for a food documentary, and half of it never gets finished. So keep it simple. 3 moves. Do 1 lap first, make your first plate small, and use the live stations. 1 lap stops the panic grabbing. A smaller first plate keeps you honest. And live stations. Omelets, pasta, carving, grill, mean the food is made for you, not sitting out waiting under heat lamps. You'll eat better and waste less. There's one more move that's weirdly powerful. Ask questions. When passengers casually ask, "What happens to leftovers?" or "How are you reducing waste on this ship?" it creates pressure in the best way. Curiosity turns into accountability, and green slogans start needing real receipts. And that's why the buffet itself is changing. The old school luxury buffet was all spectacle. Mountains of food, giant trays, endless displays. But that version is aging out. The new premium look is smarter control and better quality without the unnecessary excess. So the buffet of the future will probably feel different. Smaller trays, refreshed more often, tasting portions, more like a tapas line than a trough. Still plenty of options, just less of the pilot high and hope for the best. And the tech will push it even further. More ships are already experimenting with real-time adjustments, quietly shrinking what doesn't move, boosting what's popular so it stays full without being wasteful. AI doesn't take away your choices. It just helps the ship serve the right amount at the right time. Because this shift isn't happening just to look good. It's happening because it has to. And in a decade, that overflowing buffet mountain might look less like luxury and more like a relic from a time when people confused excess with quality. So next time you're staring at that endless buffet, remember, behind one tray of food is a whole system. Data, rules, machines, and an invisible crew working non-stop to keep a floating city from turning into a mess. If this made you look at cruise buffets differently, hit like. It helps the video reach travelers who actually appreciate the behind-the-scenes reality. And subscribe for more cruise and travel breakdowns that keep it real. Now I'm curious, what surprised you more? The buffet one-way rule? Or the fact that under strict international rules, some processed food waste can be legally discharged at sea? Comment one word, buffet or ocean.